When I was a junior in high school, there was a girl in my class whose nickname was Spots. They called her that because she was always covered in bruises. Sometimes I saw her crying in school. My friends told me her father was violent and abusive. I felt sorry for her. One day I met her mother. She was haggard and covered in bruises as well. A few years later, I heard from my friends that Spot's father had died of a heart attack. Later, I ran into Spots and her mother in the street. Spots looked happy and healthy, but her mother still looked haggard and bruised. Another few years passed and I hadn't heard anything from Spots. One day I was shopping at the mall when I happened to meet her mother. She was looking very happy and healthy. I rushed over and introduced myself. Then I asked her how Spots was doing. "Oh, she died in a car crash a few months ago," her mother replied. I was so shocked I couldn't say anything. It was so sad. I'm a scientist. For years, I've been working on a chemical that turns water into alcohol. I think it's going to make me rich. All you do is put one drop of this chemical in a glass of water, and it will be instantly transformed into pure alcohol. It works on tap water, well water, rainwater, anything that contains water. I think I've perfected it. Now all that remains is to see how it tastes. Let me take a sip. It tastes pretty good. Exactly like alcohol. Nobody can tell the difference. Did you know that the human head is the same weight as a bowling ball? My friend asked. He thinks he's so smart. He has a book of random facts and he keeps bringing them up in conversation. Yeah, I already knew that, I said. There was a young couple who had been dating for 2 years. On her birthday, the girl decided to invite her boyfriend over to her apartment. She wanted them to have a romantic dinner together. The young man agreed. On the night of her birthday, as she was preparing the special dinner, she got a phone call. It was her boyfriend. "I'm sorry," he said. "I've got to stay late at work. I have a very important deal to take care of." The girl was furious. She shouted at him and hung up the phone. All alone and miserable, she sat down at the table and started eating the food she had prepared for both of them. Just then, the lights went off and she plunged into darkness. She heard footsteps creeping up behind her and a hand grabbed her shoulder. The girl screamed and swung the fork she was holding in her hand. There was a dull thud as her attacker fell to the floor. She hurried to her bedroom, locked the door, and called the police. A few minutes later, 2 officers arrived and entered the apartment. They identified themselves and the girl unlocked her bedroom door. She waited while they searched the apartment. When they came back, one of the policemen said, "There's a dead man lying on your kitchen floor with a fork stuck in his throat." The girl broke down in tears. The policeman tried to comfort her. "I didn't mean to kill him," she sobbed. "It was self-defense." "Yes," said the policeman. "It looks like the robber was trying to steal this wedding ring." There was an elevator in a high-rise apartment building. Too many people got on. The weight of the people exceeded the maximum weight capacity of the elevator. When it was coming to the top floor, the cable suddenly snapped. The elevator plunged to the bottom. I was going to call an ambulance, but that wasn't necessary. Nobody was injured. I was awoken by a strange sound. However, it's still dark outside. As I fumble for the light switch, I wonder what time it is. Very early, I guess. Even though I flick the switch, the light doesn't come on. No electricity, I guess. Only thing I could do is lie here and wait for dawn. Everything is eerily silent. Yet I'm sure I heard something. Even though I can't see, I can listen. Something is there, I'm sure of it. My parents sent me to summer camp. I didn't want to go. Maybe they were punishing me. The camp is painfully boring. There's never anything to do. Once you get here, you'll never want to leave. That's the motto plastered over the front gate. How depressing to be stuck here forever. The other campers are an unfriendly bunch. They're rude, ignorant, and inconsiderate. The worst thing is having to share a cabin with them. I have to share my cabin with two nerds, a male and a female. I'll call them Nerd Boy and Nerd Girl. They are also deathly boring. I ignore them and they ignore me. It seems like nerds flock together because Nerd Boy and Nerd Girl often bring their nerdy friends to the camp. They sit around and discuss science or computers. Listening to them talk makes me want to hang myself. One day, they veered off topic and started discussing supernatural phenomena. I was lying on the top bunk listening to their conversation. Nerd Boy was telling everyone that 2 years ago in this very camp, a girl had been murdered and her killer was never found. He said he asked the counselors about it, but they refused to discuss it. But Nerd Boy was a budding detective and had conducted his own investigation. He said he had determined that the murder happened in our cabin. Nerd Girl said she knew how to make a Ouija board and suggested that they try and contact the spirit of the deceased. However, this board she constructed was laughable. It was made from a piece of cardboard cutout of a cereal box, and she was using the cap from a bottle of Gatorade. As soon as it got dark, the four inept paranormal investigators lit some candles, burned some incense, and sat around the table. I, of course, was not invited to participate, but from the top bunk I can see and hear everything. The nerds joined hands, and Nerd Boy said, "Spirit of the deceased, communicate with us." It was all I could do to stop myself from bursting out laughing. Then they all placed their fingers on the bottle cap and waited with bated breath. "Spirit, are you there?" asked Nerd Boy. The bottle cap began to move, and they all read the reply, "Yes." "Were you murdered?" Nerd Girl asked. "Yes." "How old are you?" asked one of the nerds. I couldn't stand it anymore. I put on a creepy voice and said, 13! They all screamed, jumped up, and fled from the cabin in terror. It was so funny. There was an old lady who had been living alone ever since her husband died. She was very lonely, and her children rarely visited. After a long time away, her oldest daughter came back to live with her. One day, they were watching TV in the living room when the news came on. There was a story about a woman who had been arrested for attempting to strangle her mother. "Such a stupid thing to do," the old lady said. "Yes," her daughter agreed. Strangling her mother was a stupid thing to do. My friend and I went to a remote fishing spot in the mountains. We were planning to do some night fishing. In the parking lot, there was already one other car. We made our way down to the lake, and further down, we could see the light of a campfire burning. While we were fishing, a man came out of the bushes. He was holding a log. "What brings you all the way out here?" he asked. "We're night fishing," I replied. "Are we disturbing you?" "No, I don't mind," he said. "I thought you were on your own." The man turned around and went back over to his campfire. We went back to our fishing and didn't think anything more about it. Then just 2 weeks later, I saw an article in the newspaper. It said that a man had been arrested for murdering his wife. He had taken her corpse up the mountains and burned it to destroy the evidence. I looked at his picture. It was the face of the man who talked to us that night at the fishing spot. I live in the city and often use the subway to go to work in the morning. One day when I was waiting for the train, I noticed a homeless man standing in a corner of the subway station. He was muttering to himself as people passed by. He was holding out a cup and seemed to be begging for spare change. A fat woman passed by the homeless man, and I distinctly heard him say, "Pig." Wow, I thought to myself, this homeless man is insulting people and he expects them to give him money? Then a tall businessman went by, and the homeless guy muttered, "Human." Human? I couldn't argue with that. Obviously he was a human. The next day, I arrived early at the subway station and I had some time to kill, so I decided to stand close to the homeless man and listen to his strange mutterings. A thin, haggard-looking man passed in front of him, and I heard the homeless guy mutter, "Cow." Cow, I thought. The man was much too skinny to be a cow. He looked more like a turkey or a chicken to me. A minute or so later, a fat man went by the homeless man and he said, "Potato." Potato? I was under the impression that he called fat people pig. That day at work, I couldn't stop thinking about the homeless man and his puzzling behavior. I kept trying to find some logic or pattern in what he was muttering. Perhaps he has some kind of psychic ability, I thought. Maybe he knows what these people were in a previous life. I observed the homeless man many times and began to think my theory was right. I often heard him calling people things like rabbit, or onion, or sheep, or tomato. One day, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to ask him what was going on. As I walked up to him, he looked at me and said, "Bread." I tossed some money into his cup and asked him if he had some kind of psychic ability. The homeless man smiled and said, "Yes, indeed, I do have a psychic ability. It's an ability I attained years ago, but it's not what you might expect. I can't tell the future or read minds or anything like that." "So what is your ability?" I asked eagerly. "The ability is merely to know the last thing somebody ate," he said. I laughed because I realized he was right. He said bread. The last thing I ate for breakfast that day was toast. I walked away shaking my head. Of all the psychic abilities someone could have, that one must be the most useless. Once again, thank you for listening to another episode of the Cryptic Collection. The answers from last week are posted below. As always, next week's video will have this week's answers. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe. And watch out for the cold-blooded people around you, or else you may be dead by midnight.